Hi, my name is Charlie. I'm one of the authors of our paper, Robustness and Overfitting Behavior of Implicit Background Models, presented at ICIP2020. I will provide an overview of our paper and introduce another author, Shirley, who will provide a demo, as well as an overview of our code so that you can reproduce the results yourself. So sit back and enjoy.
As the applications of deep learning become more prevalent in our lives, it also becomes ever more important for our understanding of their reliability within critical systems. However, systems relying on deep models are becoming increasingly more complex and require highly specialized training to understand failures. It is therefore imperative to have access to some form of visual intuition of their behavior. Our overall goals in this presentation are to provide an intuition of spatial response for implicit background estimation models, explore the behavior under various overfit settings, and demonstrate a technique for visual analysis in a complex setting. To provide an intuition for spatial response, we propose using a model trained as a weak segmenter to produce segmentations and attention maps. The underlying method utilizes implicit background estimation to both allow out-of-the-box visualization as well as allow us to train segmentation models with only image-level labels. Implicit background estimation essentially considers the background to be present only when all foreground components are negative within the logit space. In order to train with image-level labels, the model uses the log-sum exponential spatial aggregator to convert class action maps to logit vectors. As implicit background estimation relies on 0 as the decision boundary for the representation space, sigmoid cross-entropy is used as the objective. Our experimental setup uses CIFAR10 as the dataset and ResNet18 as the model. We modify the baseline ResNet18 to be trained as a sigmoid cross-entropy implicit background estimation model and compare it against the baseline model across various proportions of the training set and 7 different data augmentation settings. Then, we test against the original test set and 12 perturbed versions. While the SCrIBE model does outperform the baseline ResNet18 in terms of accuracy, it is at the expense of calibration. However, the relative improvements that result from augmentations are consistent across both models. When visualizing a single example across all training set proportions and augmentations, we can immediately see that there are consistent behaviors from which we can begin our analysis. Namely, for the first row where no augmentation is used, when the proportion of a training set increases, the mask generally concentrates to a smaller point. We observed that both crop and combined, which has the random crop augmentation, exhibit consistency of concentration across all proportions. We exploit this pattern of sparsity to further measure our visual observations. In keeping with our visual observations, random crop and combined have consistently lower sparsity compared to other measures. Even more telling is that random crop and combined outperform the other conditions for accuracy and expected calibration error. Notice how combined also has significant improvement for calibration, but is never the best in accuracy. When performing the same visual analysis from the perspective of input corruption on a model trained with the random crop augmentation, we observed that corruptions that remove details imply that the model depends on the shape and contours of the input image. Corruptions that add information demonstrate where the model relies on texture. However, in the other corruptions, there is a similar response to the baseline. We also observe the intuition that augmentations associated with a corruption will exhibit the best resulting resistance to that corruption. Thank you for listening to the overview of this paper. I will now hand it over to Shirley for the demo.
Thanks to Charlie for giving an overview of the paper. My name is Shirley, and I'll be giving you a demo of the Jupyter notebooks used in this paper. Here is the notebook for preparing the dataset. First, let's import any necessary libraries. Then let's define the 7 data augmentation transforms. The first one is if there's no transform at all, then random crop, random horizontal flip, random rotation, random perspective, color jitter, and then a combined transform of all of the above. Then let's import the CIFAR10 dataset. And lastly, we want to create balanced subsets. So here we randomly pull 10%, 20%, all the way up to 100% of the training dataset and then store the data loaders for them. we want to make sure that each of the subset has the same number of samples for each of the 10 classes. Now let's look at how to define the SCrIBE model. And as you can recall, the SCrIBE model is the image classification model that's modified with implicit background. Let's first import the resident 18 model. Then we need to make some changes to the first convolutional layer and max pole to prevent the spatial features from being downsampled too quickly. Now we need to make the changes that can transform it into a segmentation model. We need to replace the linear layer with a pixel-wise linear layer so that there's no spatial aggregation at the end. In this way, this model becomes a semantic segmentation model. Next, we define attention. Attention represents the model decision region. Here it's defined using log sum exponential and sigmoid. Lastly, we want to set up the criteria, optimizer, and LR scheduler. Here notice that for the criteria, we're using binary cross entropy because we want to learn a binary classifier for each of the classes. And lastly, it's just a code snippet for saving the initial state of the model so that we can reset the model in between training. Here is the code for defining the original image classification model without any IBE modifications. And this is used for comparison during the experiments. First, as usual, we want to import the resident 18 model. And then we want to make some changes to the first convolutional layer, which is the same as the SCrIBE case, as well as the number of classes in the final fully connected layer. You can see here that we're removing max pole because this wasn't present in the IBE model. This way, we can make the two models more comparable by removing it. Lastly, we want to define the criteria, optimizer, and LR scheduler. You can see two differences here. First is the initial learning rate. The initial learning rate for the original model is a bit higher because the SCrIBE model uses sigmoid instead of softmax. The second difference is that because this is a regular image classification model, it is trained using cross entropy loss. Here's the code for training. First, we need to do some setup and import any initialized datasets and models. Then we initialize some variables. And if we have some checkpoints, we can load those as well. Here is a helper function for resetting the model in between training. And this is the main loop for training and saving the model. You can see that for each of the configurations, it's trained for 30 epochs. In the training loop, we want to train for all configurations possible, and that includes applying each of the 7 data augmentation settings on the 10 different training sample size settings. And you can see here that the non-IBE model is trained using the standard procedure. But for the IBE model, the labels need to be converted to one-hot vectors, and the attention needs to be calculated from the segmentation outputs. In the end, a spatial aggregation needs to be performed to generate the logits. And of course, here are some steps for saving the results and saving the model. Here's the notebook for doing the testing. First, we want to install the ImageNetC library and then do some setup and importing. We also want to initialize the models. And here you can see that we're loading the testing data and the functions to corrupt them using ImageNetC with different distortions and 5 levels of severity. Here is a helper function for loading the models that's saved using the trainer. And here is a helper function for calculating the expected calibration error. Now, this is a function for creating the segmentation maps and attention map visualizations. It takes in a batch of the segmentation output from the model, and the attention maps can be calculated from them. Then it forms a segmentation mask by assigning a unique hue to each of the classes and then combining it with the attention map using HSV visualizations. This is a function for one instance of model testing. You can see that it has similar procedures for non-IBE and IBE models. You can see that here it's calculating and saving the accuracy and confidence values, as well as the data to be used to calculate expected calibration error later. There is a function call here to the visualize function for the SCrIBE case. This is the loop for testing the model on different corrupted testing sets. So you can see here that we're corrupting the data using the current corruption and severity level through this helper function. And then for each of the training configurations saved, which involves different data augmentation and training sample size settings, we want to load the appropriate model and then test the data on it. Lastly, we want to save any results. Lastly, I want to go over how to calculate sparsity as defined in the paper. Here is a helper function for calculating sparsity. And then in this loop, we take each batch and perform model inference steps to get the segmentation outputs, and then pass through the attention function to get the attention maps. For each of the attention maps, we want to count the number of zeros present and find what percentage it constitutes in the whole image. And eventually, we want to average this over the entire set. That's all I have on my side. I will now pass it back to Charlie.
Thank you, Shirley. It was a pleasure to share our work, and we thank you for your time and attention. If you're interested to learn more about our group Olives at Georgia Tech, visit our website linked below. There you will find links to the code Shirley demonstrated, as well as many other related works. Again, thank you.